do believe, I mean, I have a friend, his name is Mathieu Ricard, and he is also a prominent author. He is a Buddhist monk,
Mm.
and the Tibetan Buddhist monk, often acts as the spokesperson on meditation issues for the Dalai Lama, and has written quite a few books that are doing very well, one called Altruism.
Mm.
And he says that one of the objectives of meditation is to train your mind to love the whole world and everything in it. And it certainly seems that there's something to this.
Yeah.
I can't do it, but he seems to be able to do it a little bit better than me, at least. So maybe that's a possibility for people.
It's I can't help but think as we're talking about this, there's like this the visual I have in my head, or the concept I'm thinking about is almost like, and I'll stick with the machine you used as a metaphor, maybe literally for the brain. It's almost as we develop consciousness and our ability to be aware of it, it's almost like we are now playing with this machine, right? We've had the ability, we're supposed to be, for lack of a better word, enslaved by this machine. It just controls us and we go. We have, I'll use godlike, and I know that's a triggering term, but we've kind of assumed this godlike ability to detach from that and look at it and say, exactly as you're saying, like, there's certain machine processes that were designed for certain purposes, and we're kind of just playing around in this machine and like, well, what if we do that? What if I love my car or the teapot? Or what if I become hungry for money? And we're starting to mess, and love maybe is a beautiful articulation of looking how that plays out. And you can almost view it as like a mad scientist, where there's an ability to create something amazing and beautiful, or there's an ability to create something horrific and terrible, because we're kind of playing around with stuff that we don't fully understand and seeing where it goes. And even the way you were explaining love and the expanding circle of, what we care about, you can't help but thinking that as you start to expand that, tribalism starts to come about, and the sense of like mine versus yours, and this is my group and that's your group, and wars and battles. And that's kind of the dark side of it that you can see as you start to play with that. But then you're getting to this next point, which is loving everything. And maybe that's the beautiful piece of it. If we can rewire this machine in that way. And what I really love, no pun intended, about this conversation is, and there's no conclusion in this, is that we are starting, I think both of us are very kind of analytical. You're obviously very scientific, psychology, and know the research. And even as we follow the thread of the research and the science, it starts to get us to this kind of abstract concept of like enlightenment and loving the world, and this kind of thing that would normally be viewed as more spiritual. And I love the connection of that, because I think there's far more of a connection in that in our world than we often think about. We view it as very binary. It's the science or it's the spiritual. And I think what you're articulating through this conversation, and again, love is probably one of the best mechanisms to do this, is we can explain it through science. There's a reason it came about throughout evolution and history. But now we've hit this point where with our consciousness, we're doing things that are different with this science, and we're manipulating it and playing with it a little bit. And who's to say where it's going to go? I think there's a lot of people that would believe your friend, that if we can all kind of embrace this idea of loving everything, that's where life should go. That's where we should evolve to as humans. But history has suggested we haven't gotten that right yet. We keep taking this love and using it to kind of kill people and hurt people because we worry about just ours. And again, no conclusion in that, but I just think the way you're articulating this and the way you're using love to take us through science to where we are today is just a fascinating way to look at human behavior and the human species and how we act. And it makes you think and appreciate things in a way that's very hard to see if you don't dive into it in this deep way. So I mean, I know we're coming towards the end, but this for me is making me think about things that I've thought about in totally different ways than I have before. So maybe I'll end with this question, Aaron. Where do you land on that? I know you mentioned it before. There is a dark side. I think you called it enmeshment, is the term, and maybe that's a different topic. But do you worry at all about this? Do you worry about the dark side of this as we expand our love, that there maybe is something that's going to go wrong with it, or are you optimistic overall?
I'm optimistic by nature.
Hmm.
The very last chapter in the book looks specifically at sort of the future of this and these issues, and it finds reasons based in currently developing technology to be both optimistic and worried.
Uh,
So let me start with the worried and then go to the optimistic.
okay.
So we can end on a positive.
I like it.
So the worried is human beings as we evolved, never faced things that weren't people, but seemed a lot like people.
Mm.
That was never an issue that came up very much. And so, in the same sense that certain Aboriginal people never developed antibodies to certain types of infections, and then those infections come and cause damage,
Mm.
we've got, at a neurological level, we're defenseless against anthropomorphic objects, which are objects that seem to look a little bit like a human being. We consciously are completely aware that that's not a person. If you have a little talking robot that's 10 inches tall and speaks to you, you know that's not a person. But unconsciously, it's triggering some of the same responses that a human being would trigger.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say all of the same, because we do treat objects differently, even anthropomorphic objects. We know they're not people, but it's triggering at least some of the same responses. And so our behavior towards anthropomorphic objects is kind of halfway between the way we would treat a person and the way we would normally treat an object. People are extreme. It doesn't take much of a disguise. The anthropomorphism does not need to be very human-like in order to get a very strong response from people. I worry about what's going to happen when that technology gets a lot better.
Mm.
Right now, people are very happy to talk to conversation bots, little robots that talk with you. And the conversation level from these creatures is very low. It's not very good. But we're working on speech algorithms all the time and conversation algorithms. And it's only a matter of time until this mechanical conversation partner becomes really insightful and clever and understands your emotions and knows just the right thing to say it at every moment. And I worry about this in some ways supplanting human relationships to a significant extent. Mm. You might argue, and I think you may be correct, that at least for the foreseeable future, there will always be something deep and profound and important about a relationship with another human being that you cannot replicate with an android or just a mechanical conversation partner. But I'm scared by the example of junk food. Mm. Junk food is not the best tasting food. It is not the most nutritional food, but we eat a lot of it, even though we all know there's better food out there. We eat a lot of it because it's easy and convenient. In the same way, relationships with these anthropomorphic conversation bots can be very easy and very convenient.
When you have exploit, right? Just like junk food, it can exploit the systems in our mind or our body to make us like it even more, right? Sorry to stop you going.
No, that's a great insight. Yeah, I totally agree. That's a great insight. And we eat a lot of junk food, even though it's not the best junk food. When you have a friend that's a human being, if you want that friend to listen to your boring stories, you need to listen to their boring stories. If you want them to do you a favor, you need to do them a favor. But with these conversation bots, they're just going to want to listen to you all the time. They're not going to want to have boring stories, and they're never going to ask you to return a favor. And I worry that that sort of junk food relationship could become very powerful, and that it could also set a bad precedent, that we'll get used to that. And then when we're relating to people, we'll be dissatisfied because they act like people and not, always putting us first. So that's the bad news.